So, my name's Jumshed. My parents met in the 1960s, about 100 yards away on the other side of the road, in a dance hall called the Palais. And I grew up in this city. With my English side, not with my Indian side. I'm half Indian and half English. So I grew up with my mother and my grandma in a low-income household. Women's wages in the 1970s were considerably lower than they are now. During my lifetime, I've seen around me increasing levels of consumption in just about every area of life. I remember when I was a boy, my mother telling me how she lived when she was a girl and thinking how little she had and thinking how much I had. And I suppose it was like for her mother, she would have thought how little her mother had. And now I feel like, wow, when I think children here for me and I think how little I had and how few places I went. So since the Industrial Revolution, fossil fuels has really helped our consumption along. So have cheap imports. Each generation sees it as normal what we're consuming. So it's just normal and we don't question it. Each consecutive generation also sees it as normal, the amount of insects we have and the amount of birds we see in here in our gardens. The first Earth Day, I presume most of you have heard of Earth Day, is one day a year where we supposedly celebrate the Earth and have it in our attention to have more care and respect for the Earth. The first one was in 1970. But over the last 50 years, it's been like historical amounts of damage being done to the Earth. It's the time of rapid increase in our consumption over the last 50 years. So you could say it was a failure. Maybe it would have been worse without it, who knows? But for example, in the UK, just in the last 40 years, the amount of money that the average person spends on goods and services has doubled. That's just in the last 40 years. We're spending twice as much money on stuff and services. In 1970, about half of the households in this country had access to a car. I grew up we didn't have enough money for a car. Most of the houses in the street I lived didn't have a car. But now, it's over 80% of households have a car. And in reality, more people have a car, much more than that, because households have less people than they did. More people live alone, more families are separated. So in 1970, it was 3 people per household. Now it's 3.3. The proportion of our money spent on food is significantly less than 1970. That really facilitates us spending more money on other things, consumables, travel, entertainment, whatever. So desires for more comfort, convenience, cheapness of products and services supported by fossil fuels, mass production and cheap imports has allowed us to do these things. This is cheap imports from countries with low-level economies. In the 1970s, people owned significantly fewer clothes. I mean, drastically fewer. I suppose the average man in England in 1970 had about 4 pairs of shoes. Now it's apparently about 14. But I don't know what it is for women, but that's what I read. So, everything's larger to accommodate this. Our wardrobes are larger. We get through stuff much quicker. It's common for people to discard their clothes, not when they're worn out now, but when they're bored of them, or when they're not the fashionable thing. We take them to charity shops. Charity shops, to me, they kind of work hand in hand with fast fashion industry. People can have a feel-good factor by giving away the clothes, even when they're not worn out. So, in 1970, in Britain, there were 5.7 million trips abroad. By 2018, it's grown to 47 million. So it's gone up by 9 times the amount of travel to other countries. Individuals are encouraged to travel more, to experience the different places in the world, to learn about different cultures, be world citizens and widen our perspectives. But I always think, what about other people in the world? If we really need us to be world citizens, what about all the people in Africa and India and South America? Do they need to travel to other places? Are they going to be narrow-minded if they don't? In reality, 84% of people on the earth haven't been on a plane once, not even once in their whole life, and they never will. But we just see this as normal. People say, I don't go on a plane very often, only every 2 years. I've always, I managed to go 37 years without going on a plane. In recent years, I've been on them. My father lives in the USA, that's my challenge. I've got a father and younger brother and sister in the USA. So disposable income, that's the money that people have left over from their wages after they've paid for their essential things like food, heating, rent, mortgage. Disposable income has generally increased since 1970. So we've had more money for other stuff. So according to the Office for National Statistics, the average disposable income for both the richest and the poorest households has grown, and the rate of growth for the poorest has been the slowest. But it's kind of like that in the world. The richest people in the world have got richer, but so have the poorest. But the poorest, I think there was, how many is it? In absolute poverty is when people are struggling for food, for water, for shelter. That number of people has gone down in the world. There's still a significant amount of people in absolute poverty. But in this country, whenever you hear about poverty, it's relative poverty. It's a number of people whose income is 40% the average income, which still can be a struggle if you can't buy, children the shoes that all the other children are wearing, if you can't get them the clothes that other children are wearing, if you can't, get the nice clothes that you want yourself or take them out to eat. Growing up, going out to eat was a rarity for me, but now it seems a commonplace thing. Everyone goes out to eat. We have food made for us by strangers. So supermarkets compete for our custom. And we congratulate ourselves for buying the cheapest food. I worked on a farm, an organic farm, for 10 years. So I have some idea of farming and the pressures put on farms by supermarkets, vying for your custom. So it puts the pressure on the farmers who try to get as much food as possible out of a piece of land. And that means even more toxic chemicals, bigger fields with less hedgerows, more chemicals, increasing the amount of migrant workers, and making the lives of animals in farms even more awful than they already are. For example, places where chickens are kept for people to eat, there's between 25,000 and 50,000 chickens in these huge sheds now. And they're there from hatching on day one for 6 weeks, and then they're shoved into crates and they're gassed with CO2. My mother calls me and my siblings her chicks, but those chickens never saw their parents. Most of the birds on the earth are chickens. In this country, 1 billion chickens are eaten a year. I grew up in this city, and as Ned said, I really wanted a car. I wanted a lot of things when I was a teenager, but when I got to my later teenager years, I started to rethink things, considering the effect on other people around the world, considering the effect on life on Earth. I decided 3 things, which I kind of stuck to. One was not to have a car. I may end up with a car. This is not a categorical thing, I'll never have a car, but I've basically driven about 5 miles since I passed my test as a teenager. I also decided not to have the kind of life where I needed to get trashed on the weekend. Get trashed, meaning get drunk. So a lot of people get really stressed with their jobs. So being an advocate of living simply, I haven't needed to spend as much money as a lot of people on certain things. I haven't bought any new clothes since I was about 20 years old, including shoes, which isn't the easiest thing, being my height and feet my size. I also decided when I was a teenager to eat a vegan diet, and I've stuck with that as well. not stuck with that. It's been easy. It's been a relief, and I feel really pleased about these choices. So people socialise over consumer. I already mentioned restaurants. You know, people used to socialise going to each other's houses and eating, but it's changed. You know, you're cheap if you just want to invite people around to your house. You know, we feel we're being meager if we're being more careful with how we consume. If we wear clothes that are a little bit old-looking or mended, or if we have the house a certain temperature, you know, we associate with impoverishment, being impoverished. So, yeah, there's pressures on family. So the rate of change of what we consume is ever increasing. There's new markets for new things. We have new needs. People think, you know, they don't need something, then they use something and they like it and it becomes something they use regularly and they have a new need. We have new needs created every year. Are we any happier for all these new needs? Oh, is this generation happier than the generation before? There's no evidence that we are for all these new needs. So the rise of our so-called standard of living is very gradual. So it's really unrecognised. And it seems not really that questioned. A person born into a particular generation, as I say, would just see everything around as normal. House sizes, indoor temperatures, cleanliness, walking distances, the distances from our workplaces, the distances from our families, the lifespan of the products we use, relevant holiday destinations, and so on. So yeah, we've broadened our horizons for what we can consume. And there's mass ignorance about the consequences of our habits, and that's a real powerful force in helping us keep them going. And it's easy to be ignorant of the consequences of our habits because we're so distant from the things that are being done to supply our needs. We don't see the animals in these big sheds, you know, they're hidden. We don't see the slaughterhouses. We don't see the factories where clothes are made. When I was a child, my mother preferred to get our clothes from Marks and Spencer's. We were low income, but she wanted to get the best clothes, made in Britain kind of thing, quality clothes. We also had hand-me-downs that I had clothes from my cousins and my sisters and brothers, which was very common then. It doesn't matter if they're old, that's just what you do. But that was acceptable to do. But yeah, so we're distanced from the consequence of actions. One of the most notable ones, I think, is climate change. You know, we just sit on a plane for 5 hours, 8 hours. What do we see happening? You know, it's a bit noisy, it's a bit uncomfortable, but supposedly once that carbon's up there, that's it. And we get 2 weeks, interesting memories. You know, we get bonus points. People, it's like people feel good about traveling so many places. There's people say, oh yeah, I've been to 75 countries, like brownie points, whatever you call it, like you've done something great. When I was about 20 years old, I remember a friend telling me, my father lived in India, my grandfather, sorry, and I wanted to go and visit him, but I didn't want to get on a plane. I ended up never going. I did go when I was 7, my father took me on a plane. But I remember I was thinking of going overland. And I remember one of my friends telling me, if you do go to India, take something for the people there. Because so many people just go to a place and, yeah. I mean, some people volunteer, but if you go like 10,000 miles away to volunteer, the amount of money spent on your ticket, you could probably pay for a volunteer there for a year, in reality. So we're in a time period known as the sixth mass extinction. So it's rapid biodiversity loss, rapid loss of species, and it seems to be primarily caused by human beings. Unsustainable land use, climate change, as I say, habitat destruction, habitat fragmentation, pollution being major factors. Habitat fragmentation that's when you separate the habitat into two pieces, and that can cause restricted breeding. It can cause, trouble with migration. Just like with hedgehogs, for example. Hedgehogs are a threatened species in this country. In the 1950s, I think there was 50 million. Now there's about 1 million, and about 50 to 100,000 are run over by cars on the road. So each night, hedgehogs, they go out for about a mile in search of food and mates. But I see more and more fences in gardens, panels, so these creatures can't get around, and there's less hedgerows in the countryside. So this is one example. The six great extinction, and insects are the ones that we're losing most of all. And I remember, even in my lifetime, I remember there was way more insects when I was a child than there is now. Amphibians are the next. But they're part of the web of life. They're our life support system. 38% of the world's trees are now threatened with extinction. And trees not only supply oxygen, they also supply the food and the habitats for many creatures. Coral reefs are like the rainforests of the ocean, sheltering approximately 1 million species are becoming barren or in a state of constant decline. CO2 emissions are a big part of that. So we have all these things we like to do that give us pleasure, and there's no evidence that we're actually getting more pleasure than we were before. There's actually evidence that our desires for more and more increased pleasure don't work, that we need a certain amount of unpleasure, that, just some coolness, some lower temperatures in our life are good, some rain on our head, some, wind in our face, So the effect on us, I think it's recognised that there's rising levels of mental ill health in the UK, more than caused by just being more aware of it and the reporting of it. It seems the levels are rising, and obviously COVID-19 increased that. But social isolation and loneliness are cited as significant factors contributing to poor mental health. And these have been rapidly increasing as well. People are having more time by themselves. There's a drive to be independent. Everyone wants to be independent. One of my dear friends introduced the word interdependency to me, which I think is a beautiful word. We're all dependent on each other. We're dependent on the insects, on the birds, on the amphibians, And those who think they're the most independent, who've amassed the most money, are often the ones that need the most services. Well, they're usually the ones that need the most services, because they've got lots of money and they're dependent on having all these nice things and all these things that they do. So they've been increasing, and it's most notably, it's notable, in consumerist cultures. For the first time in history over the last 50 years or so, there's just increasing levels of people living by themselves. In the last few years, I've really considered my idea of universities. I went to university. I was thinking to be an architect. But then when I was in my late teens, I thought, I don't want to be making supermarkets, and I don't want to be making houses that don't give care to, insulation and stuff like that. So I had second thoughts, and I ended up doing philosophy. I thought that's pretty harmless. But in recent years, I've noticed how many people live in Leicester who came to Leicester University. And I think that's a common thing. We're excited about our children moving away to go to university 100 miles away. But the reality of it is that they may fall in love, they may like that city. And then who's looking after you when you're older? Strangers. Who's looking after you? The grandchildren? Strangers. So, the breakup of family is celebrated in age. Also, another thing about universities is teenagers are being conditioned into debt, which really supports a consumerist culture. So people who haven't got the money can just buy anyway. So 30% of households in UK are people living alone, which is double the amount from 1970. That's huge. Twice the amount of people living alone than 1970. So worldwide, the amount of people living alone is higher in higher income countries. And we're not the top in that. Norway, Denmark, Finland, Sweden, Germany have high level of one-person households. They all have high level of GDPs, gross domestic products. So they kind of go together. So studies show that loneliness and social isolation aren't just associated with mental illness, they're associated with high risks of health problems such as heart disease, high blood pressure, obesity, type 2 diabetes, depression, anxiety, and cognitive decline. Living alone is kind of stigmatized. It's not looked as highly upon in many countries. I remember someone telling me a story years ago of some African children coming over to visit their donors, their patrons who'd really helped them and their families. And they went to some of the houses of the patrons, the people who'd helped them financially, and the kids were sad. They was like, what's happened with all your family if they all died? You know, why are you living alone? It's a strange thing that's going on, but we see it as normal. I know some people like living alone, and some people aren't that social, but it's a social. Humans are social beings, and we even go on our phones or our laptops or whatever, seeking connection. It's not the best way, but so. Yeah, like I said, increasing level of obesity, which is 10% of the people in 1970 were classified as obese, 10%. Now it's 30%, another huge increase. Cheap food, unsatisfied desires. And the effects on, I mentioned chicken farms, they're blamed. Most of them are in the 3 counties. Some of the farms even have 1 million chickens. They're blamed for devastating the River Wye, polluting it with phosphates and nitrates from their waste. Our consumption of clothes. I don't know whether any of you heard about the Rana building collapse when about 13 years ago, 1,100 people died when the building collapsed. They were doing an order for some kind of clothing company that distributed in England and USA and other countries. That was in Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, it's still very common. Most people who are working making clothes are doing 10 to 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week. And when there's a rush order, they're doing 18-hour days. And they get paid hardly any money. But they're pleased for that money because they get food and accommodation, whatever else they need. So half the population of the earth earn less than £5 a day. I think that kind of shows us who's responsible for climate change, because the amount of money that we spend, I think, is an indication of how much harm we do in the world. Even if we don't spend it, if we have it in a bank, what the banks are doing, they're just funding other people to harm. So yeah, half the population earn less than £5 a day. 1 in 12 people in the world, how many people are in here? More than 24. So that's like 3 people in, there's probably, I don't know, earn less than £1.60 a day. 1 in 12 people earn less than £1.60 a day. I've heard, I don't know, some of you probably heard of the term ivory tower, but I feel like I'm living in a bubble. You know, when I read these things, you know, Even the so-called poor in this country are living like kings. Mentally, they may be struggling, but the amount of excess that we have, the amount we consume, there's no significant evidence that they're actually any less happy than us, these people who earn so little money. Certainly the ones who are in absolute poverty, there's evidence that they're less happy than us because they haven't even got struggling for food, shelter and water. So, yeah, our consumption is really supported by having trade deals with these countries. We can click on the computer and buy what we like that was made in these places, click on the computer and go and visit them, you know. So in Africa, there's about 1.5 billion people. That's a significant proportion. It's seen as one of the most economically poor countries on the earth. It's also one of the most rich countries in terms of fertility and minerals and different things. So 1.5 billion people, and there's 38 cars in 1,000 people. 38 cars in 1,000 people in Africa, and many more of them are taxis than the cars here. In the UK, it's about 500 cars in 1,000 people. So 38 in 1.5 billion, here it's 500. So, in my lifetime, people talk about equality, and for a long time I've thought people always talk about equality and think of it in our society, but why don't we go further? You know, if we had equality, if we wanted everyone in the world to have a car, be like us, the Earth would be done for by the end of the year. You know, it's not even feasible anyway. So, common narratives to try and fix this are often around efficiency. One example is insulation, insulating our homes. There's many notable campaigning groups that wish for warm homes, which is quite bizarre to me. Most of the people in the world don't live in warm homes, and we didn't live in warm homes 50 years ago. Now, lots of groups are campaigning for warm homes. Yes, there's people with limited mobility, elderly people, people with medical conditions who really need to be in a warm home. But most of us don't. The NHS said that anyone who is under 65, healthy, active, can lower their thermostats down to less than 18 degrees. That means putting on more clothes. But I put on clothes in the winter when I'm inside the house, which was normal. That's kind of the normal thing to do in winters worldwide. It was normal to kind of do that 50 years ago, but now I would be seen as like impoverished. What's the problem? You ain't got enough money to pay your fuel bills. Why are you being stingy? You know, why are you wearing all those jumpers? I have a bunch of friends, thankfully, who do the same. I wear a hat inside sometimes in the winter. I think that's okay. I don't think for the moment, just turning down the thermostat by just 2 or 3 degrees will reduce the amount of energy use as the same as insulating the whole house. So I ride my bike around Leicester and see all these houses being insulated, and there's masses of plastic outside, all the waste plastic. What's going to happen to that? It's either going to go into a hole in the ground or be burnt and then pollute our air. So it's just like we're trying to just keep up our consumption. We talk about electric cars, recycling. Most recycling is actually downcycling. So you don't recycle a glass bottle into another glass bottle. Glass is actually one of the better ones because a third of all glass is made into glass bottles. So 1 in 3, because new glass bottles can't have too much recycled glass because it won't be clear enough, it won't have good enough qualities. But yeah, most glass is downcycled into products like insulation or used as aggregate, used for filling in building houses or whatever. Plastic bottles are usually downcycled, made into things like clothing, carpets, or construction materials. And like this top here, I don't know if it's made of, I don't think it's made of plastic bottles. I got it for free. It was an unwanted Christmas present. It was just in a pile of clothes, unwanted clothes. But after I finish using this, clothes don't generally get recycled. I'll use it, and it'll have patches in one day probably. I'm not wearing my patch clothes today because I thought I'd be a bit more respectful, seeing as this is quite a special venue. So this is my sweater clothes. I have a tie somewhere, but that'd be a bit too much. So cars, yeah, people with this kind of fix-it thing, trying to keep up with our consumption, but do it differently to avoid fossil fuel usage. There's a movement to electric cars. Particulate matter, little plastic bits from electric cars are much more than normal cars because they're much heavier, so they wear their tyres out quicker. Their engines, electric motors, have a much greater torque, so that bite into the ground wears these tyres out. I was riding my bike today and it was windy, and I grew up with breathing problems. I have asthma, and it hasn't been windy for a while, so there's a lot of stuff on the ground. I was thinking, I'm breathing in all this dust of plastic tyres. People are eating it. If you eat outside in the city, you're eating plastic. The polar regions are melting quicker. You know, the white ice in the solar caps, whatever they're called, they're melting quicker because they're not as white as they used to be, because they've got a very, very, very light covering of car tyres. So cars, the batteries for cars are one of the reasons that there's going to be so much lithium and cobalt mined. And people in South America, where most of the lithium is, especially indigenous people, are campaigning against it. They don't want it because it's polluting the water, it's taking the water. And significant numbers of people in South America have died protesting, trying to stop the lithium mines. I think there is a place for cars, for electric cars, but just trying to do a switch and just repeat, everyone have a electric car. We need to move away from car ownership. Cobalt is the other thing that's required in car batteries. Have any of you heard of Sylvia Earle? She's an oceanographer in her early 90s. She's up there with like David Attenborough and Jane Goodall. She's campaigned quite a bit about deep sea mining for cobalt nodules. So in order to fuel the electric car industry, there's plan to mine the deepest parts of the ocean. So they're going to suck up all the particulate matter, all the different creatures will go up as well onto a ship, and then they'll take out these little cobalt nodules, and then they'll blow everything back down. So that it's Sylvia Earle has campaigned against that, but where's it going to be? Everything we consume causes some kind of, you could say, harm we take, but the thing is about taking what we need. And I think I really value more the things I have by maybe not having them when I want them. They come like a gift. Oh, it's like now I've got one of those. And by having a history, it's like when I remember when I was about 20, walking down the street, and butchers, before things moved to the supermarkets, there used to be butchers in the city with animals hanging upside down. And I remember really not liking seeing that, thinking of, I don't want to cause animals to die, I don't want to cause them to live in sheds, whatever. But then a few years later, I started to see many other shops like that. I'd walk down the high street and see the clothing shops and think of all the dyes going in the rivers. One reason why all the clothing is made abroad is because they don't have the restrictions that protect the rivers that we have. So the dyeing industries are by rivers because all the dyes go in the river. After farming, it's the biggest source of pollution in rivers. So burning household rubbish to make electricity is getting more popular in this country. Nearly half of the rubbish produced in homes in the UK is being incinerated. And it's actually producing more CO2 emissions than burning coal power. But a bunch of years ago, the government became really concerned with the gases being produced by burning rubbish. It's actually seen sustainable energy, burning rubbish, because I suppose they see it never ending, the amount of rubbish that will happen. So, yeah, but the reason why there was a shift to incinerators is because of landfills, because of the methane emissions from landfills. It's one thing that from when I was about 20, I find quite disturbing as well, how people so easily put something in the rubbish. It's just like throw it away, just discard it, shut that, and we're trashing the earth. People talk about sacred land. Landfills, sacred land, they're not sacred land. We just put all the stuff there. We have to line it with all these membranes so there's no leachate, so we don't poison the water. So, yeah, whether they're landfills or incinerators, they're not working very well in this country. There's opposition to them. So more of our rubbish is going abroad to places far away. I remember visiting one of my friends once, and I was interested about his mother growing up in India about 80 years ago. I said, how did you wash clothes when you were a kid? How did your family wash clothes? And I was in the kitchen of her house. Her sons and family did very well and earned a lot of money and helped their parents, her and her husband, to move into a bigger house. And she's sitting in this big kitchen by a table. I'm talking to her, and her daughter is translating for me because I don't speak Gujarati. I said, how did you wash clothes when you were a little girl in India? He said, we went by the river. And we got some of the kind of material that was on the riverbed, and we used that. I said, and I pointed over to a washing machine. I said, which was nicer, that or this? And she wasn't in any doubt. It was by the river. It was a social activity. It was under the sky, hearing the birds. But she's really pleased with her big kitchen. She's really pleased with her washing machine. Social conformity. I'm a bit strange in that I don't use washing machines. It's one habit I have that I do feel bizarre about when I'm doing it, but I enjoy doing my washing. It's something I've done. I've washed my clothes since I was about 20. That's 35 years. I use a ponge, which is like a washing tool that was used about 50, 60 years ago, and I seem to have time for doing that. So yeah, I've lived very simply at times in my life. I lived in a yurt, I built a yurt, I lived in a yurt in a wood above the orchard on the farm I worked. And I really appreciate the trees and the plants and the sounds and the fresh air. But I was a bit isolated from people, and it was at that time when I really realised the importance of feeling to the connection to the rest of life on Earth is important, but more so is important to our feeling of connection with other people and community. And unfortunately in cities, so many people are deprived of them both. They don't have the connection with the so-called natural world, with the other life on Earth, and we don't have connection so much with other species. A paradox that I've realised in the last few years is that in order to, all these things that people are sharing, doing, these activities, are actually pulling us apart. But there are ways that we come together. If you don't go out to that meal with all your friends, you're kind of by yourself. If you don't go in that car or go in that holiday, they're getting married, and they're getting married in Cyprus, everyone's invited. People get married abroad now, invite lots of people. Oh, you don't love me, you're not coming, It's like, so, what was I saying? What's my point of it? Will come back to me. So,
you were saying that you were living in a place connected with the nature, and then now in the city, people are neither connected with the nature, not connected with each other.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was going to say something else. Well, yes. This is a regular thing to do, is lose my point and then ask people in the audience.
You're just trying to see if you're paying attention. All planned.
I know it's long and it's, but I don't. It's like I feel my life. It's an adventure, you know, and it's creative, and I feel reward for not having what I want. You know, we get people. There's a dopamine release when people buy something for less money. We feel good, and our brain makes that even more important. So we want to do it again. We want to buy cheaper food. We want to buy cheaper clothes because we feel good. We get this dopamine release. So it's kind of like reprogramming ourselves to have dopamine release for, wow, I've mended it. Wow, look at this I found. I can use that. You know, wow, that bit that I was going to chuck out, I'm glad I saved it. So, yeah. We call someone an environmentalist. I really don't like the word environmentalist. We call people environmentalists or eco-warriors. I don't really want to be called an environmentalist or an eco-warrior. It's like we're something special because we care. I care about the rest of life on Earth. I'm not saying everyone else doesn't, but we don't have special names for people who respect other sexes. We have names for people who don't, like you're a sexist. So we don't have special names for people who respect other races. We have names for people who don't. So they're a racist. I don't believe in calling names, but we talk about racism, sexism. But yeah, we don't have a name for people. It's we have a name for people who by default don't, which is successful. You know, fortunately, economically successful. Oh, you know, I think I usually qualify the word. Hello.
One of the biggest reasons I think why people are racist is fear. And
Yes.
one of the biggest fears at the moment is about the size of the population and blaming it on population when it's actually mostly big business and half a dozen billionaires that are spreading the problem around the world. I don't believe the population is rising as much as other people say it is. I can't see how it possibly can be when there is there's been terrible natural disasters all around the world. There are wars which are murdering millions of people, and the birth rate, the fertility rate has gone down all around the world. So I don't really believe these kind of figures about the population rising. And of course in this country it's ongoing reporting about what's really not that many people coming over in the boats that are taking all the brunt of this.
Yeah. I totally support refugees coming to this country for safety, and climate refugees as well. When I worked on the farm, there was like half English people and half were from the Czech Republic. The last year I worked there was only me and one other English guy, and everyone else was from the Czech Republic. The wage was still the same 9 years later. You know. it was just like, this is why a lot of people aren't into just immigration, because those who are the least in this country are challenged the most by it. It's easier for people with more who are comfortable to be not challenged by immigration. And I actually feel sad seeing more and more people living in Leicester and less green spaces, seeing badger sets destroyed, So, yeah, I'm from an immigrant background, but I can understand the reasons why people aren't in support of it. One generation ago, outdoor children playing outdoors was so much more, 70% less time outdoors than one generation ago. When I was a kid, we were out so much. We were out until it got dark. It was the thing to do. Exploring the garden, or just riding my bike around and around the block. I grew up in a terrace house. We didn't have a front garden, just a small back garden, but just riding round and around. So, yeah, I said about we're losing appreciation of our interdependency, which doesn't just support our physical and mental health, but also, I think, our emotional health. Sharing with others and sharing with the living world. They talk about forest bathing. So, things that I think are really important for moving away from consumerism are mending and making. I'm quite skilled in those. Most people in this country were reasonably skilled at some level of skill. So some people in the family were making and mending things. But these skills have died away. Cheap imports. Sharing stuff is looked down on, It's like second hand. We've got to share stuff, share spaces, share our gardens, share our skills. Not having what we want, I think, is really good. It's supposedly spiritual practice. It's not satisfying all our desires. I think that's through quite a bit of religions. I know it's not a religious place, but I think it's just kind of a universal thing around a universal thing in religions and non-religions, that we see it as not healthy to satisfy all of our desires, but we're getting more and more desires, and we're seeking to satisfy as many as we can, and we're trying to keep up with other people. So it's learning, and it's letting go, and it's embracing other aspects, other things in life, embracing having more time with other people, embracing having more time with your family, embracing not feeling so responsible, not having to look at, I don't want to learn about that, I don't want to hear about that. Be able to accept, feel happier with what we're bringing to the world. Maybe I'll remember what I forgot at some point, but are there any questions? I know I've gone on and gone a little bit like that.
I'm sure they are, because you've sort of told us like it is, and it's, I think, sometimes a bit uncomfortable as well.
Everyone's doing their best. I honestly think everyone is doing their best. And the paradox. Can I just say, that was what I was going to say. It was the paradox that the way we're living, I think, is drawing us apart. But we're drawn, but to carry on doing what we're doing, we have to stay together and shop, stay together and travel, stay together and consume. So if we move away, but those things are pulling us apart. They're destroying our life support system. So the paradox is just to actually support us being together and our lives, we have to actually move away from being together and find a new group, to be with, and people who have similar ideas and thoughts. But it isn't easy. It's a breaking away, and it's an embracing something else. Yeah?
I think you're actually saying what I was almost about putting off on after that lady had her say, is that you came to a point where you said that people who don't respect other races or other genders have words, but it's people who do respect the environment that have labels, and what's the alternative accessible? No, I would argue with that. I would say what people who don't respect the environment are called is quite worse than successful, it's normal.
Right.
That's the problem.
Well, it's one thing.
That's what you're saying.
Cheers. Yeah, it is one to say it's normality that's recognised. People like to look at billionaires, but the average life of someone here is like a billionaire, someone in Africa or India or It's just normality. It's just being normal. Everyone wants to be normal. Why? But there's so many things that are normal that are beautiful, like caring for each other and like appreciating whatever food or whatever. There's lots, but it's the other normal. Yeah, it's the new normals that we're getting day after today, and it's normalities, reckon. Yeah.
I was interested when you discussed. It's true about Sweden, Finland, Norway. They are wealthy and more people are single. And I did live in Helsinki a couple of times, but consistently I noticed how much social the country is. It's cold in winter and it's dark, and people go out and they hang out in bars and it's lovely warm and they all socialise. Finland has been the happiest country in the world by its own admission for the last 4 years in a row. 4 years in a row, not a clue. They ask them, but they also base it on how they live, how well the society is ordered, the difference between the rich and the poor, the fact that you don't go around stepping over people in the street, it's not full of litter, the trams come on time, people have jobs. They don't go around avariciously looking for money, but they have cars, they have living houses, they have trams, they go to the cinema, they go to the bars, they drink, and they go on holiday. So they're not saving the planet by any means. They're actually happy, despite the fact that more of them lead technically more socially disconnected lives, living alone.
Yeah. Oh, thanks,
So
I didn't know that.
it
Yeah.
is completely possible to have a society where everybody gets what they want, and if they want to live with someone they can, but they have the choice not to. But they still are happy by their own admission.
Brenda.
A couple of things. I'm sorry I had to beg to differ slightly with my good friend who's just stood up. I think there are some countries in the world where the population is seriously overpopulated, and in those places there's an enormous amount of much more poverty for it. Because I just think it's reasonable that if you've got less children to feed and clothe and look after, you're more likely to be able to give them surely a better quality of life. And then the other thing is, I think the other thing I want to say is about the internet. I think the internet has made, especially the younger generations, I mean, our age, we're not on it every minute of every day, but they seem to. And I think it's making them far more insular and less social, and it's not surprising it's causing them mental health issues.
Yeah. In response to
Just the two things.
your first point about you don't think this country, to me, I thought there's, is it 70 million people on this little island? It's like there's a huge amount of people on this island. We produce hardly any of our food. There's less and less space for other free living beings. And it's, what is it, like 6% woodland? I think, looking at the numbers, they're huge on this little island. And there are other countries, where... Sorry?
It's only 1% buildings we live in though.
Oh, yeah.
1%. 2% built on, 1% that we live in.
Yeah.
You'd be amazed how much isn't covered by human habitation.
Yeah, well, a lot is services. A lot of places that are for humans to gather and shop and have things done for them. So, and roads, I mean, Rishi Sunak said he was going to do 2,500 or 25,000 more miles of road. People don't come to this country. Years ago, if an Indian was on a bicycle, they weren't very successful. They didn't come from India to ride a bike. But I think there's a lot more Asians now realising how important physical health is. And maybe some are thinking about the rest of life on Earth. But social media, phones, I agree, it's not that healthy. I see myself on the computer and think, what am I doing? I would never dreamt of doing this years ago. Hopefully I'm doing something useful.
Matt,
You talk quite a bit about overconsumption and how regrettable that is. And also mentioned some underconsumption, which is also regrettable. So somewhere between these extremes, there's some level of consumption which is perhaps not ideal, but certainly not preferable. I've got a picture of what level that might be, or what might be preferable. What level would it be?
Well, what about, I really like that question. What about some, I haven't done it yet, but one thing I've toyed with the idea of doing is going on the street and asking people 3 questions. What do you think about equality is the first question. Second question is, what are you doing to encourage equality in the world? The third question would be, can everyone in the world live like you? So that would be kind of the answer. It would be like, can we all live? Everyone in the world can't live like the average person in this room. You know. So it just baffles me how we have this equality thing. It's just like, yeah, and this society seeking equality, you know, what happens is this. You know, it goes up, we all go up, some go up more than others, but that's worldwide as well. Like I say, even the poorest of poor people in the world are going up, but they're hardly going up at all.
I actually came to Leicester to explore sharing. I was joining a housing co-op. And I think that is going to be a model for the future. It doesn't seem to be very present at the moment, but it's, I think, a model for the future in the way we live. We communal, we very much for sharing things because that means we have less of them. We'll be sharing things which actually have a life cycle, which means when they are no longer usable as what they are, they can be used as something else. It's called cradle to cradle by technical people. At the moment we have built-in obsolescence. You buy a product, and I see quite a lot doing DIY for friends. They're now buying these IKEA flat pack type things, and it doesn't last like the furniture I inherited from my parents, which is still going strong, still going well. I think it's attractive. But that was how it was when I was young. You passed things on through the family as much as you could, and you expected it to last for decades, not just 5 years. So sharing, not having obsolescence, and the ability to build community, I think is going to be one of the strongest things we have to learn. It gets talked about that the oil workers have to transition. I think everybody in this country is going to go through a transition to get where we want to be as a whole in the world. And for me, I didn't realise it at the start. I was just being, I thought I was just doing a good thing. But I actually, about 40 years ago, started supporting tribal people in the world, indigenous people. And I've learned actually and realised that they are leaders. They are leaders. They've been living in a way for thousands of years that which totally respects their environment. The environment is them. It's not different. And I think we're going to go ahead for that, in that direction. The more we can learn about how their minds work in that respect, the better.
I'll just say that sharing, I think, is something I think as well is so important, and it's intimate. The act of sharing is intimate. The act of consuming usually isn't, so often it isn't so intimate. Like I said, having, food made by strangers, sitting in a restaurant, not sitting in a home. And I just want to say with the one thing in response to that as well, about one thing that struck me is that a lot of organisations that encourage us not to wreck the earth are coming from a fear-based perspective. Like the transition movement, we're going to run out of oil. The climate change movement, we're going to have food, lots of people in the world will die, whatever. But I like to put it from a positive perspective that consumerism is a kind of a con. It's not the best, it's much more of an exciting life and rewarding, creative and intimate life to, share and create and, that's great.
listening to you there, you know when we go to school, we're taught to be good people, caring, sharing, compassionate. And then when we leave school, we go into the real world. Yeah? So that what we're taught is what we call divine wisdom. We keep pushing divine wisdom on us when we're children. Be divine. It's lovely divine wisdom, which is great. It's spiritual, like you're talking. It's spiritual wisdom. Yeah? And secondly, there's no problem with spiritual wisdom. No problem with it. But when we get out into the real world, we enter into human wisdom. Completely different. Human wisdom is not good, not nice. People are horrible. It's Machiavellian. The world we live in is Machiavellian. Truthfully, it's wicked. And if you're a narcissist, you're going to do well. You're going to do well with human wisdom. If you study it, you'll do very well. But even if you watch the BBC sometimes, we show you all these wars and everything, all what this human wisdom has caused, and all these people have tried it, and look what they've done. It's a horrible world, and then it still tells them, they still subtly give you this message of, oh, why can't we all be nice to each other, Why aren't we following, they give an impression that, there's this other side to us, it's quite divine, They give it no time. They give it no time. And the thing with the green message is, it is really quite spiritual, isn't it, the green message? You've noticed, it is quite divine message. It's a divine spiritual wisdom. They are, and it's a bit confusing, because the real world is not efficient at all. You see, if we can share everything will be efficient. An aeroplane is not efficient at all. In the real Machiavellian world, the aeroplane is not efficient. The Rolls Royce is not efficient. There's no efficiency out there. It's all an illusion. There's nothing efficient out there at all.
Can I come back to your point about schools? I really enjoyed school. I really value what you said as a whole, and I enjoyed school. I kind of excelled. And I remember I really respected my headmaster at junior school. I remember him saying to us when we were leaving school, if you ever wonder about what to do in life, think what I would do. This is the headmaster, and it really meant something to me because I really valued him. But I noticed at school, as it got more serious, it got less playful. It was just like gradually, like in slaughterhouses, they don't put you right at the point of the kill. Like in the army, they don't put you right at the point of the kill. The schooling conditions you. It conditions you into not sharing. We all have to face forward. We all have to listen to that one at the front. We can't help each other. It's schooling is a relatively new thing, and it came in the Industrial Revolution. It was putting kids in mass together. I'm quite a believer in home education because I think schooling. It's difficult, can be difficult not going to school because it's a social interaction which I really appreciated. But I think it's being at your most creative, playful time in your life to be able to sit down and not speak, not talk to those around you for like 6 hours a day, I think could be seen as child abuse. But, it's just like children want to play. We told them to sit down, Socrates said, leave the thinking to adults, let the youth play, and explore.
I think you said electric cars, that's not like a switch. You said changing from diesel and petrol to electric cars is sort of like a switch. And I think from what I've heard, electric cars are better. But how do you change it? How do you make it better for cars?
Thank you, good question. I think they are better in some ways and they're worse in others. I think it's one way of really not putting up all those carbon emissions, but I think the switch has to entail using way less cars, using them if we need them. When I went to school, most kids walked to school. That was a social activity, walking to school. It was also a fighting time for me because people liked to bully me because I was tall and not white and whatever. But my mother said to me a few weeks ago, what did she say? She said it's almost like children don't have a childhood now. Kids don't have a childhood now, not walking to school. You know, it's just like permanently being, sorry.
They still walk to school.
Good.
When they're this high,
Yeah.
send them on their way.
Because it's experiencing the outside world. I mean, more people are going from building to building. You know, we're just having less time outside. You know, one thing, riding a bike is not always comfortable, but that's good. You know.
I think it's Kevin at the back, the gentleman at the front, and I think the tea's on its way. Oh, sorry. Kevin.
So how do you think we could redistribute the wealth from the millionaires to the minimum wage guys?
How do I think, well, billionaire, how do we distribute from the billionaire? I think stop supporting them first. Stop buying off Amazon, you know. Say, okay, I don't need it. You know, the billionaires are only made by huge mass consumption, by massive groups of people all buying from one person, you know, which enables us to buy more stuff if we buy the cheapest stuff. So how do we get rid of billionaires? Stop consuming as much, stop, you know, trying to buy the cheapest stuff. Yeah. How do we distribute our wealth? I don't know. Share, you know, it's just like what we do buy. I don't know. Good question, but I think not accumulating it. I'm earning money in a job now. I think, I don't know. Yeah, good questions.
You've got the last question.
Yeah, going back to your when you talk to people in the street, last thing you ask them is if everyone lives like you live. And you touched on a really number of topics with veganism, human cars, let's say travel, use. But again, explicitly or indirectly, you touched on having fewer kids.
Right, yeah.
If everyone had one child, the population would drop drastically in a few generations. People have no child over 100 years, and we have people at all. So that would kind of change problems as well, but that's a bit more extreme. But
yeah, I think it's something that I don't usually mention because I'm not an antinatalist. I think a lot of people, it's easy for them to be antinatalist because they never wanted to have kids. I've always liked the idea of having kids, but I never did. But I think, yeah, there's a lot of people in Britain, and you know, I think the size of a family is important, and yeah.
I was just coming on that one. Sorry.
The last one, because the tea's is here.
I did scrap my other three things I was going to say then, but I'd just like to say that I have 2 children, and I feel each of them is the greatest gift I've ever possibly given to them.
Okay, I think
A far more general point. It's all right, I don't think very happy about that point. Thank you very much.
I think the tea trolley has arrived, and I think we have to thank Jamshed for a really thoughtful presentation.